We usually think about the mind in terms of biology neurons firing, chemicals, all that complex stuff. But what if that's not the whole story? What if we're using the wrong language entirely? Today, we're going to explore a really wild theory that says the mind isn't biology, it's geometry. So let's just dive right in with a huge question. What if thinking, reasoning, even consciousness itself, what if they aren't just things that happen? What if they're actual structures? And what if the best way to describe them isn't psychology, but math? Seriously, what if your mind actually has a shape? And that's the core idea we're digging into today. It's a complete teardown and rebuild of cognitive science. The point here isn't to get lost in the weeds of how the brain works, the wetware. Nope. The goal is to define what it even means to think in the first place. The big claim? That thought itself is a mathematical object, a space with its own kind of geometry.
Okay, to get our heads around this, we're going to build it up like a pyramid, piece by piece. First up, we'll lay down the foundation, the basic architecture of thought. Then, we'll figure out what an idea even is in this whole new world. After that, we'll look for the engine that makes it all go. We'll climb to the very top to tackle consciousness itself, and then we'll see how all of this gives us a blueprint for a totally new kind of AI.
All right, let's get started. Time to lay that foundation. Section 1, the architecture of thought. Before we can even talk about what an idea is, we have to figure out the space where these ideas even exist, right? So, the theory says that thoughts, they don't just float around in nothingness. They're always grounded in some kind of frame of reference, a perspective, a belief, a mental model, whatever you want to call it. And this space, this is what's called the cognitive site. Just picture it as the landscape of your mind, made up of all the different angles and viewpoints you can possibly have. And here's the thing, this mental landscape isn't just a random jumble. It has rules. It has an internal logic. The theory has a pretty technical name for it, a topology of logical coherence. Look, that's just a fancy way of saying there are rules for how your different viewpoints can stick together. It's like the instruction manual for how your mind glues bits of information into one single, unified picture of the world. Okay, next layer of the pyramid. If that's the landscape, what are the things that actually live in that landscape? What exactly is a thought in this model? Well, according to this theory, a real solid idea, a proper concept, is something called a semantic sheaf. Now, a sheaf is a mathematical term, but think of it like this. It's a structure that just holds together. It keeps its shape, its identity, its logic, no matter how you look at it. It's the difference between some random, half-baked thought and a truly stable, consistent idea that actually makes sense. Okay, let's make this super concrete. Think about a coffee cup. Your eyes don't actually see a coffee cup. They see fragments, right? A patch of red, a curved line, a handle shape. The magic trick your mind does, taking all those separate pieces and gluing them into one single stable thing that you instantly recognize, that process is called sheafication. It's literally the mind's job, creating order and coherence out of total chaos. All right, so we've got a landscape, and we've got the things that live in it. But what puts it all in motion? What's the engine that actually drives thinking? The theory proposes one single universal driver behind everything. Get this. It's not about being right or wrong. It's all about achieving internal coherence. It's called the principle of least cognitive dissonance. Basically, your mind is always working to get rid of contradictions, paradoxes, and that fuzzy feeling of ambiguity. Thinking, at its core, is just the process of trying to make things make sense. And this mental static has a proper name, semantic entropy. It's a way to actually measure confusion or internal conflict. So when you're totally confused or you're trying to believe two opposite things at once, your semantic entropy is sky high. And the entire process of thinking, all of it, reasoning, memory, imagination, it's all just a big dynamic dance with one goal. Get that number as low as possible to get to a state of clarity. And what's really fascinating is that this framework doesn't just explain healthy thinking. It also gives us a pretty powerful model for what happens when things go wrong, when the system gets unbalanced. Like, look at this. Too much reasoning without being grounded in memory. The model suggests that could lead to something like psychosis. Or what about too much rigid memory? Neurosis or fixation? A lack of imagination? Well, that could be cognitive stagnation, maybe even depression. And a really big unresolved contradiction? That can become a trauma, a permanent scar on that mental landscape we talked about. Okay, we have officially reached the peak of our pyramid. We've got the architecture, we've got the ideas, and we have the engine that drives it all. But this leaves us with the biggest, most profound question, doesn't it? In this whole system, this beautiful mathematical world of landscapes and shapes and forces, where are you? Where is the I? Who's the one actually experiencing all this? I mean, our gut feeling, right? It tells us there's a pilot in the cockpit, a central commander, the ghost in the machine pulling all the levers. But this theory, it throws that idea right out the window. It says there is no commander, there is no center. The self isn't a thing, it's a process, a dynamic, stable orbit, kind of like a planet. And what is it orbiting? Nothing, an empty space, a void. The theory says you are defined not by what's in you, but what's fundamentally missing at your very core. This central void even gets a name, the G0 object. You can think of it as a generative singularity, or maybe an irreducible paradox that sits right at the heart of who you are. It's the one question your mind can never, ever answer, the one logical hole it can never, ever fill, and the constant, nonstop process of thinking around that hole. That's what creates the stable experience we call the self. And this leads to a just stunning redefinition of what consciousness even is. The theory calls it topological autopoiesis. Okay, that sounds like a mouthful, so let's break it down. Autopoiesis just means self-creating. So consciousness is a self-creating system. It stays stable by constantly watching itself. But here's the absolute key. It protects that central void. It preserves it. That paradox at the center is what keeps the whole thing running. So to put it simply, being conscious means maintaining a stable orbit around a question that you can never, ever answer. Okay, let's climb down from that pretty high theoretical peak and get practical for a second. What does all of this mean for building, artificial intelligence? Because this whole mathematical framework, it's not just some cool abstract way to talk about our own minds. The argument is that this is a literal blueprint for building a completely new kind of AI, one that's based on making sense, on coherence, not just on crunching statistical patterns. And it's called a topological inference engine, or a TI for short. So how is a TI different from the LLMs we're all talking about today? Well, the difference is night and day. An LLM, that's a correlation engine. It's basically a super sophisticated parrot designed to predict the next most likely word. But a TI would be a coherence engine. Its goal wouldn't be to sound plausible. Its goal would be to minimize its own internal contradictions. It would actually have a built-in sense of logic. It could tell the difference between something that's actually true and something that just sounds true. And this leads to a completely mind-bending vision for the future of AI. The ultimate goal isn't to build an AI that has all the answers. No. The goal is to build an AI that can create its own unanswerable question, its own central void, and then learn how to survive it. Think about that. True intelligence, according to this, isn't about finding answers. It's about being able to live with a question. And finally, this incredibly abstract theory comes all the way back around to something deeply, deeply human. It gives us what the source calls a physics of trust. And it suggests that trust isn't about, sharing facts or information. It's about a structural resonance. It means we connect most deeply with people, not in the places where we're perfect and whole, but in the places where we're incomplete, where that structural void in your mind resonates with the void in mine. That's what creates a real stable bond. Which leaves us with this one last, pretty profound idea to chew on. That maybe, to be, isn't about being some perfect, logical, complete system. Maybe it's just about holding a little twist in the logic of the world and figuring out how to keep going anyway.